I was managing a co-working space in Amsterdam when an American relocated from Silicon Valley walked in on a Friday at 4:45 p.m. He needed to print urgent documents. I told him we close at 5 p.m. sharp. He laughed and said that's just the posted time, not the real closing time. You're already seeing why I study these culture clashes. They expose how much of American normal is actually just American. I map this full-time so you don't have to. If seeing the logic underneath behavior clicks with you, you're in the right place. Stay. I explained no, we actually close at 5 p.m. Everyone leaves. He looked confused and asked what I meant by everyone leaves. I meant everyone leaves at 5 p.m. He started explaining how in America, posted hours are suggestions. Real professionals stay late. He said closing at 5 p.m. means you're not committed to success. I told him this is Amsterdam. We're committed to our personal lives. He asked if Dutch companies are struggling because of this attitude. I informed him the Netherlands has higher productivity per hour worked than the United States. He said that's impossible because success requires sacrifice. At 4:58 p.m., I started shutting down computers. He panicked and asked where the 24-hour print shop was. I told him there isn't one. Shops close. He asked what people do for emergencies. I said they wait until Monday. He looked at me like I'd suggested abandoning civilization. He printed his documents at 4:59 p.m. while muttering about European work ethic. He came back Monday and asked why everyone looked so relaxed. I told him we went home at 5 p.m. on Friday. Last month, a hotel guest from Chicago asked me why his German colleague wasn't answering work emails at 9 p.m. I was the night manager in Munich. I explained that Germans don't typically check work email after hours. He said that's not sustainable in a global economy. The colleague was probably just busy. I told him no, it's literally illegal for employers to contact workers after hours in some cases. He said that sounded like communism, and that was just Tuesday. I was teaching English in Barcelona when my American colleague received her contract. She studied it for 10 minutes, then asked where the real vacation days were listed. I asked what she meant. She pointed to the number 30 and said, "This must be hours, not days." I explained Spain guarantees 30 days of paid vacation. She said that's impossible. Nobody gets a month off. I told her everyone in Spain gets a month off. By law, she started calculating. She said if you take 30 days off, you're barely working. I pointed out there are 365 days in a year. She insisted this would bankrupt companies. I explained Spanish companies are doing fine. She said American companies are more profitable, so the American system must be better. I pulled up productivity statistics showing Spain's GDP per capita. She said those numbers don't account for hustle culture. I asked what hustle culture produces if not productivity. She didn't answer. Then she asked what the catch was. There must be a catch. I asked what she meant. She said nobody gives 30 days free. Maybe Spanish workers don't get paid for vacation. I showed her the words paid vacation in the contract. She theorized that Spanish salaries must be lower to compensate. I pulled up salary comparison data for teachers. We made similar amounts. She said Spanish cost of living must be higher then. I showed her rent prices in Barcelona versus New York. She went quiet for a bit. The next week, she used her first vacation days. She kept texting me, asking if it was okay that she wasn't checking email. I told her yes, that's the point of vacation. She said in America, vacation means working from the beach. I told her that's not vacation, that's changing your location. She argued that staying completely disconnected seems irresponsible. I asked who died and made work everyone's religion. She said that's not fair, but she couldn't explain why. I was running a hostel in Lisbon when an American graduate student arrived. He asked what Portuguese people do for their second job. I told him most Portuguese people have one job. He said that's statistically unlikely given cost of living. I explained Portugal has different economics. He insisted everyone needs side hustles now. That's just reality. I asked if he thought Portuguese people were starving. He said no, but they must be doing something for extra money. I introduced him to João, our maintenance guy. The American asked João what his side business was. João looked confused. The American clarified, "What does João do for money besides maintenance?" João said he does maintenance. That's his job. The American asked what João does on weekends. João said he spends time with family, plays football, goes to the beach. The American asked, "But what does João do for money on weekends?" João repeated that he goes to the beach. The American pulled me aside. He said João must be independently wealthy or something. Nobody just has hobbies anymore. I explained that Portuguese people work to live, not live to work. The American said, "That sounds nice in theory, but how do people get ahead?" I asked, "Ahead of what?" That's the kind of question most people never stop to ask. Ahead of what? This channel exists for that pause. Every story here rewires how you see success, one clash at a time. If that's how your brain works too, join the people already thinking differently. He said ahead in life. Career advancement. Building wealth. I asked if João seemed unhappy. The American admitted João seemed pretty content. Then the American said, "That's the problem with Europe. Nobody has ambition. João owns his apartment." The American had $60,000 in student debt. I was working at a pharmacy in Copenhagen when an American woman asked for a doctor's note template. I asked why she needed a template. She said her work requires doctor's notes for sick days. I told her she's in Denmark now. Danish employers don't require doctor's notes unless you're sick for extended periods. She said that can't be right. People would abuse the system. I asked if she thought Danes were less honest than Americans. She said no, but without proof. How does anyone know you're really sick? I explained Denmark operates on trust. If you say you're sick, you're sick. She argued that in America, you need documentation for everything because people lie. I asked if American doctors' notes stop people from lying. She admitted people go to doctors just to get notes when they're not that sick. I asked if that seemed efficient. She said no, but it keeps people honest. I pointed out she just said people lie to doctors. She paused, then said, "At least there's a paper trail." She wanted to know what happens if Danish workers fake being sick. I told her the same thing that happens everywhere. If someone abuses it constantly, there are consequences. But most people don't because they're treated like adults. She said American workers are treated like adults too. I asked if adults need permission slips to stay home with the flu. She got defensive and said it's about accountability. I suggested maybe it's about not trusting workers. She said I was oversimplifying. Then she asked how many sick days Danes get per year. I told her there's no limit. You're sick until you're not sick. She laughed and said, "That's ridiculous." I asked what's ridiculous about not working when you're ill. She said unlimited sick days means people would never come to work. I pointed out Danish productivity is higher than American productivity. She said that's different. I asked how. She said Danish companies are probably smaller and less competitive. I showed her Novo Nordisk, Maersk, and Lego. She said those are exceptions. I was consulting for a tech company in Berlin when the American project manager sent a Slack message at 11:00 p.m. Nobody responded. The next morning, he asked why the German team ignored him. I explained Germans don't check Slack after work hours. He said the message was urgent. I asked if anyone died. He said no, but the client wanted updates. I told him the client can wait until morning. He scheduled a meeting to discuss response time expectations. He explained that in American tech culture, being available shows dedication. The German team lead said being unavailable after hours shows healthy boundaries. The American said boundaries are great, but clients need service. The German asked if the client paid for 24-hour service. The American said no, but that's what separates good companies from great companies. The German said no. That's what separates employed people from burned-out people. The American tried a different approach. He said American tech workers are passionate about their work. They don't mind late-night messages. The German woman said she's passionate about her work between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. After that, she's passionate about her children. The American said that's admirable, but in a global market, someone's always working. The German replied yes, and that someone isn't her at 11 p.m. The American suggested implementing an on-call rotation. The German team said no. He offered extra pay for after-hours availability. They said no. He asked what would motivate them. They said nothing. Work ends at 6 p.m. He looked at me desperately. I told him he could either accept German work culture or find new team members. He asked if all Germans were like this. I said yes. That's why they're healthier and happier than Americans. He said happiness doesn't ship products. The products shipped on time anyway. I was teaching at a university in Oslo when my American colleague missed class. I covered for her. She returned the next day looking exhausted. She apologized profusely for missing work. I asked if everything was okay. She said her daughter was sick, so she had no choice but to stay home. I told her that's completely normal. She said she felt terrible about it. I asked why. She said in America, missing work for kid stuff makes you look unprofessional. I explained Norway has generous parental leave and sick child provisions. She asked if that means Norwegians don't judge parents who miss work. I said no. Norwegians expect parents to miss work when kids are sick. That's what parents do. She looked relieved and said, that's amazing. Then she asked how Norwegian parents prove their kids are actually sick. I told her they don't. If you say your kid is sick, your kid is sick. She seemed baffled by this. She wanted to know if Norwegian workers abuse these policies. I asked if she thought Norwegian parents were pretending their children were ill to skip work. She said, no, that sounds horrible when you say it like that. I asked then, what's the concern? She said in America, there's always someone who ruins things for everyone. I told her maybe American workplace culture creates people who feel they need to lie. She said that's a pretty dark view of America. I said I was just describing her workplace. The next month, she took 2 days off when her kid had a fever. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer to make up the work. She just stayed home and came back when her kid was better. She told me it felt strange not feeling guilty. I told her that's called work-life balance. She said Americans talk about work-life balance a lot. I said Europeans actually do it. I was managing a cafe in Stockholm when an American remote worker asked if we had outlets everywhere, because Swedish people work from cafes a lot. I said no. Swedish people work from offices or home. Cafes are for coffee and conversation. He said, but the Wi-Fi is free. I told him yes, for browsing, not for turning our cafe into your office. He looked offended and said, American cafes encourage working. I said American cafes encourage buying 6 lattes to justify 8 hours of table time. He argued he bought a coffee. 1 coffee? An hour ago. I told him that doesn't rent the table all afternoon. He said this is how remote work works. I explained this is how Stockholm cafes work. We're not a co-working space. He said Swedish businesses must struggle if they turn away customers. I pointed out he wasn't a customer anymore. He consumed his product an hour ago. Now, he was furniture. He started gathering his things while complaining about European hospitality. He said American businesses understand customer service. I asked if taking up space without paying is good customer service. He said he supported the business by being there. I asked how his presence without purchases supported us. He said his laptop made the cafe look busy and professional. I told him we'd rather look empty than be full of people nursing single espressos for 4 hours. He asked where Swedish remote workers go. I told him they work from home or pay for co-working spaces. He said that's inefficient. Coffee shops are free real estate. I explained they're not free. They're private businesses. He argued he bought coffee, so he paid rent. I did the math. His €4 coffee divided by 4 hours equals €1 per hour. Our actual rent is €100 per hour. He said that's not his problem. I told him it became his problem when I asked him to leave. As he packed up, he muttered about European socialism ruining entrepreneurship. I mentioned Sweden has more billion-dollar startups per capita than the United States. He said that's impossible given our work culture. I suggested maybe our work culture is why we're successful. He said Americans invented tech culture. I reminded him the World Wide Web was invented by a British guy working in Switzerland. He left to find another cafe to colonize. The funny thing about American work culture is how Americans defend it, even when they're miserable. They'll work 60-hour weeks, skip vacations, check email at midnight, and then explain why this is actually good. Meanwhile, Europeans work 35 hours, take 6 weeks off, disconnect completely after 6 p.m., and somehow their economies function fine. Better than fine, actually. And somewhere right now, another American is explaining to a confused Norwegian why checking Slack at 2:30 a.m. proves you're a team player. I don't chase outrage. I decode patterns. Every week I map the quiet psychology behind global behavior. Subscribing doesn't help me. It helps you catch the next contradiction before you live it.